Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks.
Good afternoon and welcome to all the councillors, and welcome back to some councillors after a little break, and to all those here that are in the public, and welcome to you, and to those listening online, warm welcome to you as well. Just a reminder for those in the room or close by that their phones, if you could have them switched off because it does interfere with our recording. Please be seated. Thank you. Have no apologies today. Declaration of interest. Councillor Soward. 9.2, thanks, Mr Mayor. 9.2, noted. Any other declaration of interest? No. Confirmation of the minutes. Somebody happy to move the minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of April? Councillor Harris moved, seconded. Councillor Spencer, thank you. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. No deputations, no petitions. We go into community reports. So I have Miss Lucy Byrne from Healthy Tasmania. Lucy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I often say my job is a bit like the builder's product. No more gaps. Because there are a lot of people in our community who need help, and there are a lot of services that provide that help, but often the two can't find each other. So what we do with Healthy Tasmania is we jump in the middle and fill that gap with whatever's needed. Sometimes it might be a podcast, like you heard from Penny a few weeks ago. Sometimes it might be a community-wide health and wellbeing program. It might be a facilitated workshop, strategic planning, training, grant writing, evaluation, or writing policy. The reason we do this is that we know that there are a lot of people in this community that miss out on accessing services, and they miss out because of a problem or a barrier or a broken system. And it's often something that we think can be fixed. And we love solving problems, particularly when it can help people to be the best they can be. That is what we do at Healthy Tasmania. Now, when I think about our job, I often think of a woman who I'll call Tina. I first met Tina when she came along to a free active garden session as part of a community-wide health and wellbeing program we're running on behalf of your council. She was dressed in head to toe purple. She was nervous and not confident, and she used a buggy to help her get around. Tina started to come to other programs like Activate Your Life, Active Parks, and she used a buggy to get around. It was easy to see that the benefits that she got from this program weren't just about her health, they were about her whole life, and particularly when she moved from that buggy to a walking frame. The biggest change I saw in Tina was when she agreed to speak at a statewide health and wellbeing conference. She'd never done public speaking before, and she received a standing ovation that day. But there's one line that I'll never forget. She said, "People like me, we need a hand up, not a handout." When I think about our business, I also think about running along the country roads out at Evandale where I live. Earbuds in, listening to the first cuts of a podcast of an episode called Rule of Thumb that we made in partnership with the Women's Legal Service, listening to my sister talk to clinicians and survivors of domestic violence. There was one woman who was in a relationship for years when she was constantly told she couldn't do anything well enough. She couldn't peel the potatoes right, she couldn't vacuum the right way, and when she did it wrong, she paid for it physically and emotionally. The podcasts that we made with the Women's Legal Service have now been listened to by thousands of people, giving them the information they need to keep themselves safe or to keep their loved ones safe. Then there's the Tasmanian Health Report that we made with St Luke's Health, where the results showed such a huge level of psychological distress in the Tasmanian population that St Luke's decided to change their claiming structures and allow their members to access free services for mental health, preventative health care. Now, evaluation, that's the boring part of a project, right? Well, not for us. We love to collect the data, we love to hear the stories, and we love to make these programs better for the future. And there's so many services out there that need help with evaluation, like City Mission, who we're working with right now. Now, I'm denied about telling this story at a public council meeting, but when one of the facilitators from City Mission told me that she didn't know the real name of one of the children that was going to be in her trauma, grief and loss program because the parents simply referred to him by a 4-letter word in the community, and that word started with C. Yep, it's pretty hard to hear, but this is why these kids need help. This is why the services and the programs that they participate in need to be evaluated and made better for the future, and that's why the work we do in our community is so important. The final story that always comes to mind for me is work that we did with the Royal Flying Doctors. We're working in a small rural community and helping them to treat head lice, of all things. We were told that some people were using Coca-Cola on their kids' heads. Some people were pouring methylated spirits on their kids' heads to kill head lice. But the one that got me was parents were putting animal flea collars on their kids to kill head lice. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't live in a state where people are putting flea collars on their kids to treat head lice. So in this project, we provided free head lice shampoo, and we ran information sessions across the community all in the same week so that the parents had the information and the support they needed to help their gorgeous kids. So for Penny and I and our trusty offsider Hayden that many of you know, and about 150 subcontractors that we engage across the state, supporting people like Tina, the woman who can't peel the potatoes properly, the child who's called a four-letter word, and those parents that are doing the best that they can to support their kids with the money they have. In Tina's words, we need to give them a hand out, not a hand up. We need to fill the gaps. So this is just a snapshot of the work that we do in the community, a quick 3-minute snapshot, and it hasn't even included all the great projects that we're working on with your council, such as the road safety project in the northern suburbs, the health and wellbeing framework for the north of the state, the sports facility plan, and of course my baby, Active Launceston. But we are grateful for the support of your council, and it's this type of support that keeps our doors open, our staff employed, contractors engaged, and your ratepayers to be the best that they can be. So if you've got any more gaps for us to fill, we're ready and waiting.
Yeah, thank you. Well done, Lucy. Thank you very much for those stories as well. It really helps to understand what's happening with your work, and appreciate all the hand-ups that you are giving to our community. So well done. Thank you. It's now time for public question time. We have no questions on notice. Any questions without notice? Gus?
If I may put my hand up, Lisa, I haven't seen you for 12 months. Isn't that amazing? And now I've got you all together.
Have you got a question for us?
I'd like to ask the city for help. The community's in desperate trouble, Mr Mayor, over palliative care. And through this election campaign, I've learned a lot about what is going on. And I would see the council has an opportunity to join with the community to give this city the proper palliative care that they deserve. And by that I mean a 10-bed hospice. We have the facility, and I'm asking the council, would they facilitate a task force to bring us a hospice in 2026? Now, I know it's 5 years out. We think about 5 years' time. I won't be here in 5 years.
You probably will.
I don't.
Thanks for the question. It's something that we'll take on notice.
I would like to ask further on that question, please.
You may do.
We have 14 years we've fought for this, and I see that working with the council and government and Calvary, we could bring a hospice to Launceston in 2026. But we need to work together.
Correct.
You've attended the meetings that we've had and nothing's happened. Well, today there is a chance for us to happen because we have the plans. We've spent $5,000
Thank you.
on that.
You're not here to give speeches, so that's your questions, and we'll take that on notice and we'll get back to you on that.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Well, I've got another question.
One more? Okay, fine. Last one.
I'm allowed 3.
That's it. We've had 2, so...
Mr Mayor, I've talked on one subject and I have one question. Does everybody agree or what?
Don't think so. All right. Ask the question.
My question is, does anybody really realise the history of this city? We have a wonderful opportunity in November of this year to celebrate why we're all here. We have a chance to celebrate the Tasmanian exhibition of 1891 at its 130th anniversary. On the 26th of November, we will open the exhibition in 1891.
Thank you. We'll take that on, yes.
We have the rejuvenation of the Albert Hall. You've got a $10 million project going, and we should be able to celebrate with that wonderful hall we've got. We should be able to celebrate the hall. Also, the Briley Island organ is turning 160 years old. And I think the city should celebrate this wonderful time of this city.
Good.
And as we stand here, these lights up here were turned on 4 weeks ago by the Duck Reach Power Station in 1896. And next Monday, the 11th of May, will be the 125th anniversary of the lighting of the Albert Hall. We have some wonderful history, and I think 2021 is a wonderful opportunity for us as a city to celebrate.
We'll take that on board. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Any other questions from the public?
Mr Mayor, Alderman, Glenda King, 5 Scott Street. I have 3 questions on different subjects. Some of them have a couple of sub-questions within them. I'll start with the first one. Early on the morning of Easter Tuesday, approximately 12:15 a.m, as I was exiting my front gate, I was astonished to see a utility with men in full hazchem suits driving towards me and spraying the area. I would like to have answers to the following questions. What exactly was being sprayed not only onto the street but also directly onto my property, my front gate and entrance, my fence and my garage crossover and garage door? What is the toxicity of this material? Given the steepness of Scott Street and the direct water runoff into Wellman Street stormwater drains, how are such substances dealt with once they enter the stormwater systems? And why are residents not informed when potentially hazardous substances are being sprayed in their area?
We'll take that on notice.
I'm happy for you to take that on notice. My second question relates to the active discussion that occurred here on the climate strategy. I would like to know what practical steps Council has implemented since the endorsement and adoption of the climate emergency. What have been these outcomes? What is Council doing as part of its climate emergency response to counteract the zealous destruction of established aged trees and green cover, evidenced by the frenzy of recent subdivisions by developers on older urban properties? And is this climate emergency considered an important enough issue for the future of our city that progress is being reviewed by sitting aldermen? If so, when was such a review last undertaken?
And we'll take that on notice. Thank you.
Thank you. And my third question relates to, again, an environmental matter for this city. Does Council have a policy or procedure with regard to enforcing the retention of specific urban habitats, especially trees, that have been identified as being home to endangered or threatened species? What does Council do, given its wide powers that it possesses, once it has been made aware of such habitats, to ensure that these habitats are retained and not destroyed during urban redevelopment? Thank you, Mr Mayor, for the opportunity to ask those questions.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. So, under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to the items included in agenda item 9, Planning Authority. So we have 9.1. I understand we have a speaker for 9.1, Glenda King.
Mr Mayor Alderman, thank you. I wish to, it's actually a follow-on from my previous comment. I wish to actually draw to Alderman's attention the matter of the very highly threatened species of grey goshawks that have been cited over several years as nesting on or in the vicinity of 7 Trotwood Crescent. I understand that Council has powers within its planning scheme and other delegations to protect such habitats. I understand that Council Planning has actually contacted DPWE, who I spoke with this morning, but that only happened yesterday when in fact the issues were raised and received by Council for this development application on the 13th of April. DPWE normally takes 2 to 3 weeks to actually research the question in case, and as such I would like you to recommend to you that you actually defer making a firm decision on this property. We are dealing with an endangered species, highly endangered. There are apparently only 110 breeding pairs of these birds left in Tasmania. So if you vote for this proposal for this DA to go ahead as reported without any conditioning and quarantining, then you're certainly putting them in an even more endangered position. I would like to request that you quarantine it. You make your decision once you have had advice from DPWI and then proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? No? So 9.1, somebody happy to move a motion? Councillor Mackenzie moved. Is there a seconder? Councillor Spencer. Councillor Mackenzie, wish to
Could I
speak?
just start by just referring the question that was raised by the Speaker and just ask for a response from council officers in regards to the gospel?
We've had an allegation that this site contains a nest or similar for the grey goshawk. We've taken that on face value and we've had a look at the evidence of whether that's likely or not. There's nothing physical on the site that suggests there's any nest or any other habitat that might be suitable for the grey goshawk. We know the grey goshawk nests in wet eucalypt forest in riparian areas, so it's not likely to be nesting in a suburban roof, as is alleged. It is possible or likely that grey goshawks have been seen in the area because most of the urban area of Launceston is within their range and they have quite a long foraging range. As has been suggested, we did take some advice. Clearly, advice is not going to be conclusive because of the Rare and Threatened Species Unit haven't been to the site to verify it. But on the balance of likelihood, and from what we understand, it is incredibly unlikely that there's a nesting goshawk on that site. So we are comfortable with the recommendation as we progress. It's not identified as a habitat area in the planning scheme, but there is legislation that prevents destruction of habitat, and that runs in parallel regardless of whether we issue this permit today or otherwise. So from an officer's perspective, we're comfortable to proceed today on the likelihood and on the information that we have.
So just supplementary to that, so that means that we have contacted DPWI and they will site inspect before the trees are released?
We haven't got a commitment of that, no. We have contacted them and we've had a discussion about it.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. Again, thank you for the question that was raised by the Speaker. Again, I've looked at this area. I've lived in that area for nearly 40 years until recently, so I know the area very well. I've had a number of conversations, putting the goshawk to one side for the time being in this conversation. Again, there have been a number of propositions put by representatives, one in relation to heritage. Again, I chair the Heritage Committee of Launceston City Council, so I was quite interested in that. I've spoken at length with the officer in relation to it. I've spoken to one representative in relation to the heritage nature of the site. The reality of it is Heritage have advised that there is no heritage listing on that property. The City of Launceston doesn't have a heritage listing on that property. The precinct doesn't have a heritage listing in relation to the property. Certainly in visual review of it today, there have been a number of additions to that property over a number of years, which to my view have actually destroyed any historic context that I could see by visual view on it. There was a a note made in one of the representations about a case called Nettlefold's case, and I did question the officers in regards to that this morning, and they advised that Nettlefold case was done in relation to an older style planning scheme and therefore not relevant in this particular situation. So taking those things on face value, I'm comfortable with the heritage aspect of the representation. Unfortunately, does not raise its head as something that we can consider in this planning application. There were also comments made in regard to streetscape impact and the suitability of building the type of residence that's there, residence and how it fitted in with the rest of the area. Now, I guess East Launceston is a fairly old area, and I've lived there, and mine was a 1915 guns house, and there are a number of houses of similar ilk, but there are different styles of houses over the years that have been built in and around that area. So as a consequence of that, you know, the old and the new, every year you build something that's the heritage of some time into the future. So you need to be looking and making sure that the content of what's going to go in there is actually going to be suitable. We went for a bit of a drive today, and we'll be looking at another application about another house that's going to be moved and another house built later on in the planning scheme reviews of items today. But I also asked if we took a drive through my street and showed where a brand new house was built in a very heritage heavy property, and noted that a lovely modern house which was built about 2 years ago actually fitted beautifully into the streetscape. So there's no reason that the old and the new can't blend and work together. So again, and looking at where this property is actually situated, it's actually sitting in behind another couple of residences, so it's actually not out and facing, bulging in your face, because the entrance off Mon Street is very narrow, and you'll hardly see the residence from there. And the residence, I think, is set something like 9 metres back off the boundary on Trotwood Crescent. So again, it's well contained within the site, with reasonably substantial houses and trees surrounding the block. So therefore itself, it will not actually take up, I think, a significant monolithic look on the landscape as well. So as a consequence of that, I'm comfortable from a streetscape point of view that this house will fit in comfortably, and it will be maybe a house that we'll look at in 40 years' time and say that's a really good example of something. We can't be definite on that, but there's a chance that it will be. So we need to look at that. So I think from a streetscape point of view, I'm comfortable that it fits in with the streetscape. There are a number of other minor concessions that have been made in regards to wall height. And again, the way the property's built and where some of these walls, which will be 2 or 3 metres high, you actually won't see them because they're actually hidden in behind the facade of the actual, of how you drive into the property. So again, I'm comfortable that those walls and the retaining nature of those will not adversely impact on the amenity of others. The front setback, which is taken from the narrower setback I found out today, which happens to be off Mon Street. Again, if you look at the actual aperture that goes in there, you'll actually hardly be able to see anything through there because it's actually a very narrow aperture. So again, using the performance criteria, it quite comfortably sits in there and be slightly less than a normal setback.
Excuse me, Councillor, your time's up. Any extension?
Just fractionally, yeah.
Councillor Sauer, second of Councillor Harris. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you.
And again, and the third one was just minor building envelope impingements. And again, looking at where they are and the effect that they have on overshadowing, which is the major thing, where they're set back not as far from the boundary fences as they would be required under the scheme. Again, looking through the performance criteria, those setbacks are very minor and have a minor impact, and the overshadowing aspects from the overshadowing diagrams would say have minimum impact on the properties surrounding. Again, it's also important to note that probably most properties are significantly impacted are number 9 and number 5, Trotwood Crescent. There haven't been any representations from them. The major issue is relation to the noise during the construction, and I guess the construction rules in relation to how people build things in and around Launceston are fairly standard and will need to be met in the construction of any building that is approved today.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. My only concern is I don't know if we could get someone to look into the roof of that house. Surely we should be able to see feathers, and then we probably would know if it's that bird that's supposed to be in the roof. My only concern was the noise, but the council office will make certain it's going to be between 7 and 5, so I don't think there's nothing they can do about that. That's what happens when you build. So I don't know which way I'll go, because can we get the roof checked out to see if there's feathers or any nesting in there?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Council needs to consider this application against the planning scheme and only the confines of the planning scheme. So at this point, as was explained by the manager, this particular issue isn't addressed and hasn't been brought through in terms of being a priority habitat area or an area that enables the council to consider this. So it's not a relevant consideration from what you're determining today. As was explained, there is other legislation that deals with this, and obviously the appropriate officer from the Pee-wee may well elect to undertake an inspection or at least investigate the allegation, and really be beholden upon them using that other legislation to control that particular element, and the planning scheme in this particular instance isn't the appropriate legislative vehicle to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor, and I want to thank Ms King for her passion, as always, for our city and due process, which is appreciated. I just wanted to reference the fact that many people who'd reached out to me through the formal and informal processes had spoken to me on matters of heritage and the perceived nature of that particular property and its heritage values. Wanted to reference the response provided on page 25 of our agenda as provided in the overview by Councillor McKenzie, that the property is not listed on the Heritage Register or, importantly, the local heritage list, and importantly that it hadn't been proposed for listing as part of the study, either individually or as part of the precinct or a precinct. So for me, I certainly appreciated receiving a great number of thoughts from community members with regard to that particular property, but in terms of this mechanism under which we're assessing this particular application, it's clear with regard to the heritage status of this particular property. Anything further or any aspirations to add or change the nature of future iterations of heritage precincts or listings sits outside this particular DA.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Mayor. And just echoing, thank Ms King for her questions. Just to pick up, I guess, on Councillor McKenzie and the Deputy's remarks. In reading through the information on pages 24 and 25, that heritage phrase is something that is used a little bit, and I guess a suggestion that I would make, Mr Mayor, there are a number of items that come to us at Council dealing with buildings around about this vintage, 1915, 20, 30, trees as well that have been there a while, and the word heritage is used a lot. So often it's a word that's, if you like, misused in terms of how heritage is applied. So just a suggestion that I was going to make going forward, it's probably a really good reminder for us as a council in our information, in our marketing, in our communications, to perhaps share with the community what heritage actually means. We've got a very, very active heritage committee. We're a city that prides itself on its heritage, but just some understanding around what heritage means, because, as I said, Mr Mayor, often when something comes to council that it does have an older building or an older tree, people often do, I guess, get a little bit confused about what heritage means. And as I often say, Mr Mayor, educative processes and education helps people to understand you know, what it actually does mean and what it entails, because there is a bit of angst that can be created in the community with something that is perceived as being heritage listed, when, as in this particular example, as it explains in our documentation, that it's actually not. And as Councillor McKenzie, I think, referenced, not only is it not heritage listed, it also talks about the fact it's not identified as being of interest as part of a wider piece of work. So again, just helping the community understand what that means. Just because a building might have been built in 1920 or 30 doesn't necessarily mean that. And I also extend that, Mr Mayor, to some education around things like trees. From time to time, we do get some criticism out there about we're cutting heritage trees down. Councillors run around and talk to officers, and when it's investigated, that's not necessarily the case. So I think our officers have done a very, very good job in explaining where this application sits against the scheme. I'd also, Mr Mayor, I guess just add my voice to Councillor Mackenzie's remarks around the character of the area. And this is, again, a very tricky one for councillors, where newer buildings do get built, and I mean that's the nature of cities and what they do in non-heritage areas. And there are many examples around the place where something that people perhaps don't think is going to look good, or they're not particularly enamoured with the design of, when that building is constructed, you know, whilst obviously it doesn't look like the building that's next to it, it certainly, you know, isn't the nightmare that sometimes people might think it will be. So I guess, as we often say, Mr Mayor, when something complies with the scheme, it is beholden on us to approve that. And yeah, I just wanted to thank all who've taken the time to contact me and contact the council, and look forward to other discussion. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I like to think that when it comes to matters of heritage or, in fact, environmental impact, that if anyone's going to vote against something, it's going to be me. But in this case, I will be supporting the development application, and but I will sort of add a proviso to that, I suppose, in a second. And I take on board the comments of other councillors, and certainly the comments of Ms King and others who've made representations, especially those who are concerned about the noise factor and the interruption to their lives in a fairly leafy, quiet street in Launceston. You know, hopefully all those provisions are taken care of. And I do really appreciate, first of all, on the heritage front, when people do stand up for our heritage. I'm also a member of the Heritage Committee, and I fully understand that there are buildings in our city that are not on the heritage list, on a heritage register, that possibly should be. Sometimes we don't know the full information. Sometimes it's a building that's been compromised at some point. Sometimes, for whatever reason, it hasn't made it there. And so I'd be the first to say, by all means, bring these things up, remain passionate about the heritage of our city, the built heritage of our city. That, you know, can sometimes win the day. That can convince people. Unfortunately, in this situation, I don't think that's an overriding factor. I don't think it's one of those buildings that's been accidentally missed or just has not been assessed appropriately. I do appreciate that the character of that neighbourhood does change when we get a new building in that area. In this case, I don't see that that has an overt impact upon the character of that street, especially because of the setback. And so, you know, that's not an overriding concern of mine. When it comes to the natural heritage, the environmental impact, if it is true that grey goshawks are nesting in that area, which I've seen no evidence of, I've been told about, but certainly no evidence has been presented on that front, then of course that needs to be investigated. On the, you know, likelihood of that being the case, I'm not sure, but in the interim, I would certainly encourage anyone who has any proof or evidence of that to present that to Tipipui. As has been said, that's not something that we base our decision on today, but if we were to be told by Tipipui that this was the case, they certainly may be able to invoke a stop order or something like that. I'm not sure about the detailed legalities of such a thing. But again, this has been spoken about, but nothing has been presented to council that shows that this is the case. I've been in many places in Launceston where I've seen grey goshawks myself. I know they seem to be quite adaptable to the urban environment. They seem to, you know, forage or, you know, on different trees, fruit trees or whatever it might be. I'm not sure, no specialist in that area, but nonetheless, as I say, we have not seen that evidence. I'd dearly love to. I think that could, you know, very much change the outcome here. But in the interim, we have a development that is, you know, going to be a modern building in that, what would you say, gentrified area. But I do not see that it's going to have a significant impact on the streetscape. This council has approved some developments that have had significant street frontage impact on areas of streetscape. And I would say if you are that concerned about your streetscape, then you must, you know, gather together your community and put pressure on this council to nominate that scenic protection for your area. But in this case, I cannot see how it will adversely impact that streetscape, and I will be voting to support. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Dakin.
Thank you, Mayor. I too stand to support this development application. I won't rehash over everything that's been said. I think Councillor Mackenzie has summarised it very well, as he always does. Just, I suppose, a reference to the heritage. It is great that we do have the Heritage Council and that we have a heritage process with our buildings. And I think there's sometimes a miscommunication, differentiation to what's heritage listed and what's heritage significant and what a property could be significant. And it's nothing, by no means this property is significant to the people who owned it in the past, the people who built it, the people who lived in it. But it's not listed as heritage. And we have to be able to allow the new people who are going to build their new home to be their house of significance too. And let's say in 100 years' time, will it be on the Heritage Council or not? I'm not sure. Maybe it won't. I'm getting off topic. One thing I did witness today and observe on site wasn't a grey goshawk. It was 2 fat domestic cats. Now, I'm not sure, I'm not an expert, but I don't think domestic cats and grey goshawks are the best of mates, but if there's 2 fat domestic cats on the property, maybe the grey goshawks weren't there today.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I also don't want to go over old ground, but just to say for those people who do have an interest in that heritage provision and that hasn't been enacted, obviously this building was built and designed by a significant Tasmanian architect, Colin Phillip, and whilst we might not be able to see it, we don't see what the building looked like originally, we can't see it now because it's been altered so much. For the people who do see it, I think we have to acknowledge it's very important to them. It won't stop me from voting against this application today because I understand within the scheme there's very little discretion, and I also believe that DPP will do an eminently successful job of undertaking whether or not that is habitat for a grey goshawk. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. I shouldn't leave it till the end because everyone said it all, really. Looking around the neighbourhood, there are houses built there from 1880 to the 1990s, all within 200 metres of this house. It's not like a row of terraces that were built in Federation times or otherwise. It is an area that has changed over time. There used to be a service station just down around the corner. You wouldn't notice it today. For me, this new architecturally designed house will fit into the landscape. It will be an improvement on what is there. I'm sure if the original house was unchanged, it may be a different matter. But as has been mentioned, the 1938 Colin Phillip designed house has certainly been well and truly modified beyond recognition and would be virtually impossible to restore, I believe, back to what it could have been. And even then, it probably doesn't meet the demands of what a modern family wants. So for me, no problem in supporting this. I do think that perhaps the goshawk was probably just availing himself to the fruit on the fruit tree, or perhaps a few pigeons in the roof or mice that might be there as well, because I'm sure his native habitat is more likely to be found down around the First Basin rather than in a residential area like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close?
Thank you, Mayor. Just again, I'd like to thank all the speakers today, but I'd like to thank all the people who made representations, because I guess by the actual content have come from all the councillors. We've taken on board all the issues that have been raised seriously, and we've challenged them. We've asked the officers for further information, and I'm really pleased that we've done that and we've worked our way through that process. So again, you might not get the decision that you're looking for in relation to the decision we're about to make, but I do thank you, and it's part of the process of what planning is in and around Launceston. So I thank them for that. In regard to the grey goshawk, thank you, CEO, for your commentary on that. I guess all I would ask is that we advise the DPP that we've approved it today, and if they think that there's a need for them to take action sooner rather than later, then they can make that decision to do that, and that way at least that can be sorted out. So otherwise, I'm happy to vote in favour of the motion.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. Thank you. We go to 9.2. We do have some speakers for 9.2. First of all, Rodney Tremaine.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Alderman. Rod Tremaine from the Northern Transformation Program, UTAS's program at Inveresk. I'm just here to discuss the small structure that you're considering today, which was built by third-year architecture students as part of their Learning by Making program, which is a 3-week program at the start of each year. Three of the students have joined me here today, and one of them will speak about the project from a student perspective. I'd just like to acknowledge first up that this is a retrospective application. That's not something that the university pursues in terms of its developments. Normally we would follow a full design, application and approval process, but the compressed 3-week time frame for this project meant that we couldn't go through that sometimes extended process. Because of that, our planner worked and discussed the project with the city's planning department. We discussed it with the precinct manager, Robert Gronewagen. We spoke with Chris Bonner from Heritage Tasmania, and a retrospective approach to this particular application was considered the most appropriate one. In addition, Robert Gronewagen and Fiona Ranson from Council worked with the team that briefed the students on the potential project. They were part of the review of the design process and then the final endorsement for the design styles. I'd note that the building is constructed on the city's land at Inverest, not on a UTAS title. The structure is such that it can be moved to different locations, whether that's within the precinct or elsewhere within the city, and the university, from a maintenance perspective, with their maintenance team on site, would be more than happy to ensure the ongoing maintenance of the structure. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we have Toby Harrington.
Good afternoon, Mayor and councillors. Toby Harrington, a third-year architecture student from the School of Architecture. So I was involved in the project for the 3 weeks over summer, and it was a really valuable learning experience to actually make a life-size structure, as opposed to regularly we were just doing drawings about a structure. To get hands-on in the workshop, actually building the structure, doing lots of teamwork, and communicating with manufacturers and the community was a really valuable experience to be a part of. And speaking to the design of the structure itself, it's very much for the community. It's there as a rest place between the car park down the end of the precinct there and towards the campus into the city. So if it was raining or windy, you can kind of have a break there. There are seats that face the sports field in the area and off to the mountains. So the structure is very much for the community as much as it is for the university. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all the speakers I have. There's no other speakers. Somebody happy to move a motion? Councillor Mackenzie moved. Deputy Mayor seconded. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
Thanks, Mayor. Again, I guess, like all members of council, we don't like retrospective approvals of anything because it sets a bad precedent, I think, within the community. But I think that when you look at the particular issue that we're talking about today, it's certainly done, I guess, with understanding from council. We've been partly complicit in what's gone in relation to it because all the way along there's been a conversation about what they would like to do and what they proceed to do. They've also built a structure that can easily be demountable, so all of a sudden if we decide we don't want to approve it today, it can be taken away with largely little impact on the ground that's there. So I guess from that perspective, there is no harm in long-term aspect of what's been done if we decide not to approve it today. I'm going to speak in favour of approving it because I think, A, it's a structure that I think is very necessary as a good conduit between the car park and the university. I think it's great to see our architectural students on display. Hopefully they don't get bad habits about thinking they can do things before they get proper approvals into the future. But the reality of it is understanding the timelines of 3 weeks for them to do it, but they build it in such a way that it can be demounted and taken away if we so decide that this afternoon. I think the key issues to me were the heritage overlay, and as was said by Mr Tremaine, they got feedback from Chris Bonner from Heritage Tas in relation to that, and we're comfortable with that. Second thing was the land disturbance and the ability to firstly uncover some things which might have had some contamination in it. Again, they sought permission in regards to all of those things. So they, to me, are the two key issues associated with any sort of lasting impact on the site, and even the heritage part, because it can be taken away, isn't such a big concern to me. It was more the contamination of the site and doing something that disturbs and contamination that would probably be my only concern in relation to it. Maybe going into the future, if these things are going to to happen more frequently, we need to have a look at how we might do that, because I don't think it's good process or sends good message to the community for us to be approving something on a retrospective basis. So I guess that putting that concern aside, I mean, there were some comments about, I guess, the university taking advantage of their relationship with Launceston City Council. I think clearly they've demonstrated in the way they went about this project that they wanted to consult widely in regards to the precinct management, with the precinct manager, with Launceston City Council in relation to all the matters that we needed to do in the DA. And our officers say, look, we want to have two parallel processes going together so that ultimately we could get to a situation where we could do an approval not long after that process. So today we're here to make that approval, albeit in retrospect. I would hope that the councillors will see fit to do that, because I think the structure is actually meritorious in staying there for the future benefit of the citizens of Launceston, and as was stated, you know, UTAS are actually happy to maintain and look after it. So we'll be voting in favour of it.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm not sure there's a whole lot more to add other than the hope that, of course, Toby Harrington receives some additional credit for speaking at today's council meeting. But I would say that the transformational project as a whole, this sits outside that particular process in my view. It's been explained, the process. Others have referenced the retrospective nature of it and the fact that generally as a council we don't appreciate those. The minor shelter structure, I think, as has been documented, as has been clearly articulated, the relationship in regard and ongoing conversation that they had with council officers during the process means that in this case, even though it's been considered as a retrospective application, it certainly passes my test and will have an ongoing benefit in terms of its provision to the city. So recommend its approval.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. Like the other two, I'll also be supporting the motion. I think this is a very practical example of being able to put university architecture students to design and actually build something that is for the community's benefit. And I know that in a lot of TAFE courses and other things, people are taught how to make a concrete path, and they pour the path and the next day they get the sledgehammers out and break it up. And I think that's a great waste. And it would in fact be a pity for us now at this time to then not grant planning approval for such a shelter, because it is needed. I do remember one wet day I got caught on that particular area and got very wet because it just bucketed down. So I'll be certainly supporting it. And I think should a similar thing come forward in next year's architecture space, that perhaps if they can give it more thought about where they might do it, we won't be in this situation, but I wouldn't be against a practical resolution, and that's what we must be in this case.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And the University of Tasmania certainly don't make it easy for us to act as a planning authority when they decide to retrospectively ask for a development that's sitting on council land. It makes it difficult for the community to accept, because what we're doing ostensibly is approving something that in another circumstance, in another situation with very similar parameters, we'd be completely admonished for. And I know we can use ideas, arguments to support it, such as, oh, well, this is such a useful thing between the car park and the university. Of course it is, but again, that's nothing to do with our planning scheme, is it? We have a building here that's built on council land, and I appreciate the people who came to represent today, Rod and Toby, but there we have Rod telling us that the university would be more than happy to maintain this building, but it's on council land. If we're to accept this DA today, we're accepting responsibility for this building, as far as I'm aware. That's problematic, and that's not resolved at this stage. Conversely, if the university were to maintain this building, they should be renting that land off us, but that hasn't been discussed at the moment. How much land are we talking about? What is the area of that land? Is that an appropriate thing to section off such a small piece of land and ask for rent for it? These are all questions that haven't been answered in this process, and that is why I say the university have made this difficult. And if you would think, out of all the institutions in our society, especially an architecture school and the university, you would think would pay extreme attention to the detail of how these processes are resolved. And so I'm not happy at this stage that those issues have been resolved. I'm still not sure. I'm presuming that the council would take responsibility for it because at the moment it is on our land, and we don't really have any choice if we approve it, but to take that responsibility, I would imagine. I'm happy to be corrected from the planning officers if that's not the case. And the only other small point that I would make is that I do note on the building itself, there's a schematic of the area, a map if you like, and on there it references this building that we are being asked to approve today as the Pavilion on Kanamaluka. And I'm not sure where that name has come from. It might not be an official name, might not be a university official name, but nonetheless it's on the building. And it's my understanding that the Aboriginal community, especially those who are heavily invested in the development of the Palawakani language, are not particularly ensconced with the idea that Palawakani terms are used for things other than geographical, topographical features in our landscape, such as rivers, mountains, areas in general. Because otherwise we get very quickly to the point where we could have the Kanamaluka Motel.
Yeah, just point of order, that is not a planning matter.
It's certainly not a planning matter, but it is something that I feel the need to address. It's certainly not something I'm making my decision on today, Mayor. Thank you very much. But today I, with great difficulty, won't be supporting this development application.
Thank you. Councillor Dakin.
Thank you, Mayor. I stand to support this development application, I suppose, in regards to retrospective approvals. To the young architectural students out there, bring it on. Let's embrace what you're doing with your studies in Launceston and especially on that side. I mean, obviously I'm saying that tongue-in-cheek in regards to the process, but it's great to see what the local young talent is doing. We're talking about a building. Right, Councillor. It's a great design shelter, and I'd like to see a lot more of it along that strip and throughout the university precinct. So keep up the good work, students.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Finlay.
Thanks, Mayor. I stand to absolutely support this application before us today, and I think it concerns me when I hear people that speak against such items like this, where we absolutely were told that in advance of any action or activity that occurred, there was contact with the council. This is not a true retrospective application where we had no idea and a structure was discovered, someone made a complaint and we had to go in and make an assessment of that at the time. There was a joined-up conversation that was had together to ensure that the best outcome could be created, as Councillor Daking said, for students of the future of not only Launceston but Tasmania. We've got an incredible facility that has had a reputation internationally here at an architecture school in a precinct that we're developing to transform not only northern Tasmania but Tasmania. And in order for them to participate in the Design by Making project, they have worked with council to develop this outcome. It is a light structure. I think it's rich to call it a building that is transportable, where we worked with them through their assessments and the design and the delivery of it. I think this should be embraced, as others had said. We should congratulate them on their approach to being in contact with us in advance, even though they couldn't meet all of the requirements of timing, and not like others who, when we have retrospective applications, do it quietly under the blanket of evening or backyards, that this is upfront in a public space and should be welcomed. The other concern that I have sometimes in this language is we're trying to develop students and talent of the future. We're trying to develop people that will participate in a planning process in a really positive way, but we're also trying to develop relationship and reconciliation where we embrace people's efforts to participate in a positive cultural relationship, and where students may have perhaps inadvertently titled a light structure in a way that may not meet all of the rules or expectations about Palawakani language, that it's a signal or an indication of wanting to come together, want to embrace and respect culture and history, and I think that should be supported and embraced. Maybe a dialogue is had with people to ensure that in the future it does better, but people are trying to take steps forward, and that where we've got this opportunity here as a council, a leader, not only for our city but for our region, I think we should always respond in the most positive way possible. This application has my support.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close?
Just briefly, I think it's clear that this is a retrospective application with a difference, because it has been worked very clearly with the council officers, the precinct manager in relation to what we were trying to do. They were, I think, clever enough to build a structure that if we didn't find favour today, it can be taken away and effectively the ground be put back where it came from. My issues were simply the contamination, which has been dealt with, and the heritage overlay. Otherwise, I'm comfortable.
Thank you. I'll now put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? That's 2 against, the rest are 4. The motion is carried. Go to 9.3. Do have some speakers, I think, for 9.3. Susan McKay. Well, no, could have come. That was half an hour ago. Oh, okay. And Lee Adams is not here. No other speakers. So we've got 9.3. Someone happy to move a motion for 9.3? Councillor Harris moved. Second. No, Councillor Mackenzie, thank you. Councillor Harris, you wish to speak to it?
I will, thank you, Mayor. 22 Lantana Avenue is currently a tennis court, and it's being basically strata titled to create 2 new 3-bedroom single-storey units on the land that is basically the tennis court and a little bit of the backyard of the existing 22 Lantana Avenue. There are just 5 discretions on this. Most of them are minor regarding setbacks, overshadowing, waste storage, road crossings and car parking. So it is not a difficult planning application for us to approve. As a single-storey development, it certainly has none of the usual overshadowing that we often hear of from people who do develop inner city properties. Thankfully, as a tennis court, it was there. It's nice and flat land, so it probably makes development nice and easy. And there's really not a lot, I think, that can be put down against this. It is recommended for approval, and so I'm happy to put that to the rest of the council members to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor, and I would support the motion as well. And again, I think it's interesting. I mean, most of the ones we've been dealing with in backyards lately have been 2-storey developments. So it's actually nice to see some single-storey developments taking place, which will create less angst for the neighbours. As Councillor Harris has said, there are only minor discretions that have been required in there, and I guess probably the latter one being the overshadowing of 3/9 Rintala Street. And I do make the comment that in relation to PD4, I think it is, if this was re-put in, if we knocked it back today, again, they can build right to the boundary. So the reality of it is this development application is probably as good as it's going to get, because if it gets knocked back and comes back in another guise, they could actually use more of the boundary or the setback from the rear boundary than they currently can. So in my view, I think all of the issues that have been dealt with by the planning officers and the discretions have been made are most appropriate.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 9.4. Move council. Oh, we've got some speakers, sorry. David Gibson.
The only point that I'd like to make, speaking for the application, for my wife and I, is that when we put this development together, we met with our neighbour on the southern side that borders the western side. And so they are really only one neighbour. And we had 3 meetings with them that lasted about 3.5 hours to ensure that they were comfortable with what we were looking to achieve. And they were very comfortable and supported the application. We obviously want to create privacy for our neighbours, and we'll intend to do so with the landscaping plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Glenda King.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. First, before I make any comments about the actual plan, I'd just like to commend the aptitude of your planner, Duncan, who has listened very carefully to the concerns of representors, and just to say thank you for that. My initial comments were that I felt the building was oversized for the block of land available. Some of those concerns have been assuaged by the fact that vegetation has been planned. I would certainly encourage the owners to seriously consider some additional vegetation to the front of the property to actually ameliorate the bluntness of that and to blend more within the streetscape. Certainly buildings do change, and you've all talked about that within various applications today. I think we do need to be careful of keeping in perspective that in this particular case, it does border 7 neighbours, so it is not necessarily an easy application to please everyone. But I think with proper screening, it can be done, but it's still, I do have concerns about such a large build on a relatively small site. Thank you.
Thank you. Megan Quinton Baxter.
Hello, Megan Quentin Baxter, 25 Wellman Street, so a near neighbour. Thank you for the chance to speak. Just a comment. First of all, I don't want to intrude or upset or otherwise derail what I think is probably a good resolution for our street, but I just wanted to query a couple of aspects of the proposals, one of which is that the area given by the Town Councillor at the Council Planning Advisor, Duncan Payton, has cited, if you'll have a look at page 2 of your appendix or attachment 2 of the agenda 9.4, you'll see in that image that this area, the roof area, is cited as being 270 square metres. And in fact, it appears to be significantly more than that when you review it, taking into account that that has removed the pool area. Now, the pool area is 3 metres above ground level, and it is described in this application that the pool is integral to the building. Therefore, there's a question for planning generally about whether you can actually remove the pool as an item or an element of this building. But if you take into account the pool and the roof area, it is in fact over 85% building on this piece of land, which is 417 square metres. So I'll just park that with you because I think it's an important principle for in a residential zone 11. It's something where we have been encouraged to have green spaces, and that you've heard about that and discussed that on previous occasions to ad infinitum. So, but I just wanted to raise it, and notwithstanding, this is a 1973 build. It is relying highly on the performance criteria, which means, from a resident's point of view, I actually find that quite concerning that you've got a proposal which is entirely relying on performance criteria to get it through rather than actually meeting the standards in some respects. So, but thank you for the chance to speak, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Thank you. 9.4, moved Councillor Mackenzie, seconded Deputy Mayor. Councillor Mackenzie, wish to speak to it?
Again, thank you for the speakers and the comments made. And again, the performance criteria, I guess, was one that made me want to have a look at the house a little bit more because of the reliance on performance criteria. But I went and actually had a look at it yesterday with the owner, and now I understand why, because the nature of the block is that it's very hard to build anything on there within the performance criteria because of the size of the block. Having said that, the current house is still in that block, and it actually takes up most of the space that the new residents will actually take up. So yes, there's a little bit more with the swimming pool being put into place. But again, I was heartened when I started talking because I thought the neighbouring residents on the western side certainly was the most impacted by anything that was going to be built, because all the neighbours on the eastern side sit below, and having sat and looked on their deck, there's an overlooking aspect there today on the current build with no vegetation or screening on the eastern side, or east and western side, where the eastern side, or the town side, let me explain it that way. And the current owner actually, well, the developer actually wants to put a screening in there for their own benefit, and will add more screening, which will actually improve the amenity for others, because at the moment most of the houses that are on Elizabeth Street actually have a backyard, but they're not used backyards. So the overlooking, and I think when you walk out, you actually look that way, you don't look that way. So the reality is the overlooking, I think, is minor and won't change on the build that's there. I like the fact that the proponent who spoke earlier has spoken to the neighbour on the western side, and because their property actually surrounds them at the front, because their block goes right around it in front of their house. And there's significant vegetation already in that next block, which the proponent doesn't control. As a consequence, we'll already continue to have screening that's there because it's on the other side of the fence, and there's actually very little vegetation on the proponent's fence that actually needs to be taken out. I think there's one dead plant which is going to come out, and it's going to be replaced by a landscaping stand, which has been conditioned by council to have that in there. So there are two aspects. I think the proponent wants to do it, but it's also been conditioned so that it actually has to happen as well as part of the development. So I think that the neighbours on the downside are actually going to be protected more as a result of this development than they currently are in the one that's there at the moment. The house does raise a little bit purely because of the downstairs being not sized, and not the right size or not the right height. So that raises the building slightly, but it actually drops down in total size because it goes from a pitch roof to a skillion roof, which actually provides a further advantage to the neighbouring residents on the west, because it's actually got lower height to look over the top for their views as well. So I think that this has actually been a well planned and designed house for the block, a very difficult block. I'd like to commend the planner in regards to how he's managed to work with the proponent to make sure that the concessions that have been given are reasonable, because it is a difficult block to deal with, and there have been some things that have had to be dealt with, particularly the parking spaces coming off into the garage, which was more designed to go towards more of the front of the block than currently is. It's been brought back purely from a traffic management point of view, and I think that's in liaison with our infrastructure people. So there's been lots of discussion going to make sure that they can get the best development that they can in regards to this property. And as we saw today, the views are to die for. And so why wouldn't you want to build a nice house on that block? I certainly look from a streetscape point of view, it's not my type of house, the one that's there at the moment, and certainly what I can see in the design of the one that's going to be there, it'll sit better on the streetscape than the one that currently sits there, to my view.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. I don't need to take a lot of time other than to say it's really important, I think, to note that a DA that's assessed and is brought to the table with a significant reliance on performance criteria in no way diminishes or takes away the rigour or the certainty of that particular application. It is, if you like, a different route in order to achieve a DA, and not one that should be seen as having any less rigour or any less regard than one that meets ordinarily the standards. I think that's really important, certainly important for me to point that out. And also I want to point out, we do see many instances where developers do not engage with their neighbours, where developers simply go for the highest build that they can possibly achieve, where they don't spend time wanting to achieve some workings with their neighbours to ensure that neighbourliness, good relations of neighbours moving forward is met. And I want to commend the developer for that, who, whilst might share the same surname as me, is no relation. I also want to say that I do believe we are going to see more of these styles of transformational projects, and we welcome them. We welcome them, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thank you to the previous two speakers. Yes, this is an interesting one. No one is jumping up and down saying we should save our 1970s build house that was probably architect designed in its day, but it's interesting that no one wanted to list it as heritage. It's not particularly my cup of tea either, Alderman Mackenzie, or Councillor Mackenzie. I will make a note that a friend of mine lived in 7 Elizabeth Street, which is one of the properties that is in fact backs onto this, and he used to use his backyard quite regularly, but you've never felt the overshadowing of people looking down from this particular property. I can speak from experience on that. It was about a 6-metre wall up to their height, so it is just, you know, it's not an issue for those points of view. I think I also had some concerns initially about the large roof space that was being created and covering a lot of the ground. When you look at it and understand that the neighbour to the south is also the neighbour to the west, and because this is a small block that's been cut off, and the garden area to what is the west of this particular property that belongs to his neighbour really helps balance that out from my point of view of the coverage of the block as far as that's concerned. My only real concern about this one is that the front wall to the street is just a garage door, double door, a front door and no windows. Now, when you look at the plan, it's because it's into a bathroom, and that's fair enough, but perhaps there needs to be some thought done in the landscaping to just improve that pure brick wall structure, particularly as the 1970s bricks that are currently running along the edge of the street are to be retained. But that's obviously something for the developer to consider once he's doing the build, but I'm happy to support it at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Mayor, and I'd like to thank those who spoke and also council colleagues for their very detailed analysis of what's before us today. I just wanted to give my voice to a couple of things, Mr Mayor. Just to echo the remarks of, I think it was Councillor Mackenzie, in thanking our staff for working with those involved in this. And particularly for me, Mr Mayor, when we look at the representation section, the very important questions that have been raised by those representors, the detailed answers that our staff have provided that have clarified areas of concern, I think is really, really important. And the other thing that I wanted to add my voice to, and I know others have mentioned it, Mr Mayor, it's often at this table where we deal with developments that have a lot of angst around them because the proponent hasn't talked or listened to their neighbours. So it's very refreshing to hear Mr and Mrs Gibson have involved themselves in a significant number of conversations to arrive at what's in front of us today. And that reflects great credit on them, Mr Mayor, but also, as we often see when people do that type of, have that type of conversation, that what's before us has a lot more thought in it. It upsets me when things come here to us, we're on the day of the meeting or in the week leading up to the meeting, we're getting emails and phone calls where people say, no one's talked to us, we don't know what's going on. In this instance, with what's shared with us today, it's very refreshing to hear the conversations that have happened and the dialogue and the thought that's gone into this. And again, as I'm sure, Mr Mayor, as part of that, the issues that have been raised and the detailed responses to those, the reflection back on green space and so forth, greenery and so forth, ameliorate some of those concerns. So I wish everything that came before us did have that level of, I won't even try to say neighbourliness, I think, or cooperation or that sort of community involvement and discussion. I think it's a good template for others to follow. Whenever they want to build something or develop something, it's really good that those conversations take place. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I would just start by putting that question that Ms Quentin Baxter put about the indoor swimming pool area not being included in the site coverage or the building mass. Is that a correct assessment? And to address why this, which is well exceeds the allowable solution of no more than 50% of the site, why in this case it is, justified.
Thank you, Duncan.
Go to 85%.
Yeah, thank you. The planning scheme itself defines what makes up the site area definition, and it's the area under roof. So there's about a 40 square metre deck and the swimming pool proposed. It's not under a roof. It's an open deck. The roof area that comes over the front part of that deck, or the part closer to the house, was included in the calculation. The rest of the deck area wasn't, because it's not physically covered by a roof and therefore doesn't fit that definition. It's also relevant to know that it's quite deceptive when you look at the plan, and often you'll say, oh, that house looks really big on there, because you see the house as a single entity, whereas the open space, the rest of the site, is those narrower areas running around the site itself. They actually take up a lot more space than you realise. This has been measured on our system, and that's why I sort of stand by the figures that I've put in the report. And it's also relevant to note, just on another aside, the landscaping does include that garden bed at the front of the property, so there will be some coverage there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Walker, wish to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And thank you very much, Mr Payton, for that explanation. Yeah, it's certainly a concern of mine that we have this inner city feel. You know, on the face of it, and as councillors have had a look at it, it's going to be an appropriate development in a lot of ways. I don't know the history of this site. Was this block subdivided from the larger block that wraps around it? Perhaps so. The building that presently sits on there certainly does have a smaller footprint, so it would have gone a lot closer to meeting the standards at the time that was built. But times have changed, pressures have increased, land is scarce, building techniques have improved. This is possible, and what seems to have occurred here, as some people have mentioned, is that the proponents have gone to some length to satisfy their neighbours, and to build something that's appropriate for the area in terms of its on-street vista presentation. I certainly have concerns when, irrespective of the point that there is quite a bit of unbuilt area, nonetheless, when you look, and that is the perimeter of the property, I'm sure that does add up to the figures that are presented. But I would have thought that part of the reason that we have, targets for non-permeable surfaces is because of water drainage and things like that. It might also be because of other reasons. I'm not to know why these things are in the planning scheme, but I would have thought that part of it is to have permeable land where water can drain away naturally, rather than all of that water having to go through our stormwater system. So that is something that does concern me. But yes, certainly on the other side, here's someone who's gone to great efforts to repurpose a property that might be still quite usable, but certainly has that potential about it that it can be redeveloped, redesigned, reused to some point, which is something that's also hasn't been mentioned here, that the foundations of the existing building are to be incorporated in the developed building, and I would encourage that wherever possible, that reuse and adaptability of buildings, rather than simply demolishing and rebuilding. And having said that, I will support this development application, but I do note the concerns that we're talking about inner city zoning, where we do have specifications in order to provide for greenery, for permeability, and this is a very small block. It makes it difficult to put something feasible on there, but we have to bear these things in mind, and we have to continue in order to not put pressure on our stormwater system, in order to maintain the greenery in our inner city areas. So certainly something to bear in mind, but I will be supporting this. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Dakin.
Thank you, Mayor. Just really quickly, I'll be standing to support this application. I'd like to commend the Gibsons for the great work that they've done, and our planner, Duncan Payne, and the work you've done too. I think it's great for Launceston to see this is another scale of inner city living. We're talking $1 million homes plus on a beautiful street, and sitting side by side with some magnificent heritage listed properties too on the streetscape. I know Councillor Mackenzie said today we look at my street and saw how that worked so well 12 months or 18 months down the track when we first approved that. So I think this is going to be another great addition to the city, and I think from being a new councillor and looking at planning assessments and applications, having discretions and being able to rely on performance criteria actually gets a much better designed outcome for everybody. And I think in this case it certainly has, so well done.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close?
Look, I think it's all been said, Mayor, so I won't.
I will then put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We now no longer sit as a planning authority. So move on to Mayor's announcements. Just to highlight a few, and one was on the April the 23rd was a pleasure to, I think the Deputy Mayor was there and Councillor Finlay and Harris for the square dancing, was that right? Anyone else? No? Oh, Councillor Mackenzie was there as well, so it was a great time of fun. Joe, good colourful things, and they also presented me with a bolo tie. So you're wondering why I'm wearing this? That is why. Their 70-year celebration. You can have a little bit closer later if you like, but very honoured to receive that, and it was great to go, not only to have the reception on that night on the Friday or Saturday, also went to have a look at one of their dance sessions, and that was fantastic as well. So very important part of our city that people get out, and it's a way to be active is square dancing. It's another way to do that. It was also good to attend the President's Cup for Launceston BMX Club, and I think Councillor Harris was there as well for that one, and Councillor Finlay after I left. There might have been a few others after I left. But it's great to see their plans, and they have got ambitions for what they'd like to see up there and the way they continue to work and develop, and obviously I think that's important. Also on Wednesday the 28th of April attended the International Workers' Memorial Day. Representing Council, and Councillor Finlay was there as well. And I just want to point out that a very moving time to be there, but also how supportive and thankful they are of the Council, General CEO, and also to pass that on to our staff. They're very appreciative of the work, especially in the past, that our Council staff really helped them to get this far, whilst they are still seeking further funds from state government. They would love to see further development happen there as well. So, but they are appreciative of the work the Council has done. And breath of fresh air, was great to be part of the opening of that. Fantastic to have it back in our city, and I'm sure many of us got along to some of those things. And just to point out, on Tuesday the 4th of May, my participation in the Regional Visioning Workshop didn't happen. It's still to happen, it was postponed, so that'll be happening at a later date. Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. A couple of things I wanted to share. Last Friday, it was a real pleasure to attend the 100th annual general meeting of the Tasmanian Girl Guides, recognising 110 years of activation and transforming lives, instilling skills and attitudes and creating leaders of the future. It was absolutely fabulous to see the depth that organisation has still within our state, the way that they're able to create outstanding leaders, and the way that they were able to adjust during COVID was inspiring, really. A number of awards were presented, and of course they have many assets, including that wonderful hall opposite Launceston College. So it was a real pleasure to represent you and to be in attendance. And of course, we look forward to working with Girl Guides as they continue to, work with leaders of the future. The second thing, Mayor, I'm sure you've already done this, but I wanted to mention publicly the significant work that was undertaken with regard to Anzac Day, particularly in the COVID environment. We all know, those of us who work in events, the huge amount of preparation and planning that is required for an event of that scale, and I think we're so fortunate to have Elizabeth Clark here at Council who works with the RSL to undertake all of that work. And I know the Mayor would have been very appreciative because it went so well. There were so many wonderful comments about being able to have both the dawn and 11 a.m. service as well as the parade. So, in this COVID era, event organising is darn hard work. And for us to be able to undertake Anzac Day at that scale and level of success is worthy of a mention.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Gibson took my thunder about the Anzac Day. I attended the dawn service and there was at least 2,000 people there, if not more. which is probably in this COVID environment a great outcome, and it was very respectful. People maintained their social distance, and I was going to also pass on our thanks to the staff who made that happen. It certainly was a great dawn service. Good to be back at it. A few other things that I've attended, I won't go through them all, but the one I will mention is the 35th anniversary of City Park Radio, which you were there yourself, Mayor, and Councillor Finlay as well, and I'm not sure if anyone else was, but that was about it, I think. Great to see 35 years for City Park Community Radio, on air from 6 a.m. till I think midnight, or 10 to 10 p.m. each night, 7 days a week, is a great effort from any community radio station. Having done a little bit of radio for myself before, when I was still at Matriculation College, as it was called in those days, it is something that's close to my heart, and I do enjoy going on the City Park Radio talking about my Rotary activities, not my Rotary activities, but Rotary activities in general in northern Tasmania. So it is to be celebrated that something like that has been going so long. And I think it's looking forward to another 35 years of radio, because despite all the advances in technology, nothing has really replaced a radio for when you're doing something else and want something on in the background. Thank you.
It's also good to get an update on scores in football or basketball if you can't go to the game. Councillor Mackenzie.
Councillor Cox and I don't agree with you on getting updates on scores at the moment. Look, I've had a pretty exciting week this week. I just thought Tuesday was a really highlight for me. I spent most of the morning out at the Launceston Airport going through the emergency exercises, which gets done every couple of years out there, which is really bringing together the Launceston Airport team plus a number of other first responders in relation to an air crash, a simulated air crash, just to make sure that the plans that we've got in place will work. In fact, it was actually a really, how your Red Cross, your air services, your fire department, your ambulances, and how all that works together. So I think it was a really good exercise, which you always learn, that you have things on a page and you do it a bit like our emergency people today, where they do their planning in and around Launceston. So I think it's great now that we're back in the air, and I think we're somewhere up to about 74% of pre-COVID air flights coming in April. So 95,000 people, I think, flew into Launceston in April, which was pretty spectacular. And I think we're running at about number 5 in relation to the half-price fares as to people coming in, and I think it's really given a boost to retail in and around Launceston as a result of those airfares coming around. So pretty exciting stuff going out there at the moment. And the other thing I did later on Tuesday afternoon was, in my role as President of Northern Suburbs Community Centre, went to Youth Week up in Torrens Park, up in Mayfield. And it was great to see the council represented up there as well. And we've just got a big pole that's gone up there, which we now have Wi-Fi in Torrens Park in Mayfield, which is fantastic. So there were lots of activities there to celebrate Youth Week, but it was fantastic to see that we've actually got a Wi-Fi node up there which people can now go in from the community and utilise that, so improve the communications and the ability for people to actually access the internet. So that's fantastic as far as spreading our abilities for some of those less able to use that, the Wi-Fi and the NBN.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. You did prompt me too on the flights, because on Saturday we had a mystery flight come to Launceston, a part of the Qantas deal to promote tourism, and there was 140 people on board from all around Australia, probably mainly Sydney or Melbourne, and they loved the place. They went to the market, they went to Joe Cromie's for a lunch, went to the Design Centre, went to the Gorge and had a walk around the Gorge. So they had a fantastic time, really enjoyed by all, and some great comments mixing with them up at the Gorge. So that was good. So thanks for that reminder. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. I actually went to both film evening Friday night, and I seen you there, but I didn't hardly recognise you. And also went to Anzac Parade, the 11 o'clock service, and it was very, very good to see the people there. It brought something home to me. My son was on the West Australia when it caught on fire over 20 years ago, and it was just the anniversary the other day about it, and it really hit home to me. But Anzac Day was great, so thank you.
Councillor Soward.
Just to add my voice to Anzac Day, Mr Mayor, and just to pass on some feedback from the Lilydale and Nunamara communities. I do know that you referenced that in your report, the new Nunamara memorial, but for those who haven't lately been to Lilydale, walking through that main street there, one of the most powerful images I think I've seen is the display where there are images of the local recruits, as they were at the time, who went off and served in the war. Young people who went away, some of whom didn't come back, but just a very, very powerful display and something that the community is very proud of, and also very thankful to Council for their work over the years as being part of that. And to councillors, I would say next time you're out at Lilydale, just pop past and have a look. It's certainly quite a moving tribute. Thank you.
Thank you. No more councillor reports. So moving on, we have questions by councillors. On notice are there, and any other questions without notice? Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. Now, I've just got a couple of questions, one by a ratepayer. Can Council assess feasibility study of amalgamating our both museums, and can they do a report with the benefits and drawbacks of making one museum?
I think that's already been done, but we could forward the report for you if you like.
Right.
Just in respect of that, so obviously the council has been doing significant work in respect to the future of QV Mag, but it is still working through its processes, and it's not information that will be publicly released until we've finalised that internally. So that will be expected, councillor, to occur later on this year. In terms of that constituent, we can certainly advise that that particular matter has been investigated, and that will be part of this report that's provided in due course.
Right, I've just got another couple here. One concern, this is from a ratepayer, Myrtle Park. When will that be opened up for expressions of interest or a tender process?
CA? We're still working through that.
Still working on that one. And the third one was, I was doing a job with another council, and I was talking to a guy that actually, their second-hand vehicles, they actually put out for tender through the paper. Our vehicles and plant, how are they sold? Are they sold through tender, or are they sold straight to the dealers?
Would have. All right.
With our, we trade them in on the new vehicles, the replacement vehicles. So
Right.
if we're not trading them in, yes, and historically we have taken them to tender for disposal if they're not being replaced with another vehicle,
Yeah.
but we hold them for a certain period and maximise return.
Is it worth, because the feedback I get from this other council, they get 20-30% more by selling them
So we
through the tender.
constantly review our process to make sure, and the approach to make sure that we are getting the best return on our investment.
Right. It wouldn't take much work, because you could have an open day with all your second-hand vehicles.
If you finish the question, we can move on.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. My question concerns homelessness in the city. Obviously still a very big issue, one that many people are speaking about, and also one that I'm particularly interested in, as evidenced by bringing the question about lockers around about 2 years ago. What were the outcomes of the most recent homelessness committee meeting with a variety of different people and organisations within the CBD? Held in April, and indeed, where is the lockers concept at as a result of that meeting?
Thank you. CEO.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So the Deputy Mayor gave me the benefit of some pre-notice of this question, so I did seek a response which I'll read to the meeting. So the homelessness response meeting last week primarily addressed the impacts of lifting the moratorium on landlords being able to cancel the leases on their rental properties, as well as the current situation for people seeking emergency accommodation. The service providers were quite surprised that there has been no noticeable spike in people who are unable to meet their rental obligations, possibly due in part to assistance still being provided or being available to renters rather. These providers are keeping a close eye on the situation and expecting that it will change in the future as funds available continue to tighten. In respect to the provision of lockers, the group has elected to prioritise the Launceston City Mission Safe Space program rather than standalone lockers. This has been previously discussed by the group and was not raised at last week's meeting. However, it was noted that the Launceston City Mission Safe Space program was at capacity throughout March, and demand for the Housing Connect program continues to be high, particularly given the lack of rental properties available and the least cost for those which are available. So the council will continue to work with the service providers and the group to assist accommodation for people who are sleeping rough in the region.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, CEO, for that question. A subsequent question could be, and is, could the council's representative on that committee please consider putting the locker concept back on the agenda for consideration in addition to the at capacity Launceston City Mission Safe House program?
Yep, thank you. And Councillor Walker?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Further to my motion where I ask the council to support the possibility of what's the word I'm looking for? I was going to say agitating, but it really is just arguing for the change of the name of Batman Bridge. I've written to councillors and mayors and deputy mayors in our valley council areas, and some have written back to me asking where Launceston City Council is at in regards to our reconciliation action plan, which was delayed, of course, in order to speak to the broader Aboriginal community. So I'm quite happy for the CEO to take this on notice, but I will ask where that process is at and where, how long should we expect before we see some developments in that area.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and I believe I answered this question for Councillor Dawkins last meeting or before, but basically there's been an allocation made in next year's budget and it's in the annual plan for that work to be completed, and it will occur obviously through that process.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Mayor. Following on from the Deputy Mayor's question around the community lockers for people experiencing homelessness, I've asked a number of times now about our possible relationship with Share the Dignity, making sanitary products available to people, women experiencing homelessness. It seems to me this could be a great opportunity. If the lockers are already there and we were able to put one of the dispensers near them, it seems like we could tick 2 boxes, and I think in some matter of urgency coming into a cold winter, we should consider expediting this. Thank you.
Thank you. CEO, you want to?
Oh, no, in terms of it, I know that that's been raised with the General Manager of Community in place, and obviously has been passed on to the representative in that committee. So that suggestion, I think, along with the Deputy Mayors, can certainly be tabled at the next meeting of that group. So.
Thank you. No further questions. We'll move on to Council Workshop Report. Moved Deputy Mayor, seconded Councillor Harris. All those in favour, please. Do you want to speak to it? Sorry, Deputy
Just
Mayor.
briefly, I'd just like to highlight, as I did at the meeting, with regard to the place brand concept, that's really come a long way. I'm looking forward to that coming to Council for adoption, and importantly looking for all of the various stakeholders who are involved in the brand within Launceston, Chamber, City Prom, Visit Northern Tasmania and other big players such as the Hawthorn Footy Club and others being right behind the delivery of that concept, standing behind it with regard to documentation or being here on the day, so that we have true buy-in for something that's obviously very exciting and has come a long way and is worthy of support, not only of councillors around the table, but all of those that have responsibility to activate and deliver the brand.
Thank you. Councillor Harris. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We'll then close the meeting. I think that's all we have on the agenda. You were lucky. We got there. It did take 30 minutes longer. I'm just trying to speed him up.